You didn't choose to be alone. That's what makes it hurt even more. One by one, people started fading. The phone stopped ringing. Invitations stopped coming. Even the ones you thought would always be there disappeared. And it didn't happen all at once. It happened slowly, so slowly that you almost didn't notice, until one day you looked around and realized no one's left. The worst part? You have no idea why. You've searched your heart. You've replayed conversations in your head. You've questioned if you did something wrong, if maybe you changed in a way that pushed people away. But the truth is, you didn't change. You woke up, and that awakening came with a cost. There's a silence now where laughter used to be, an emptiness in the spaces where your life once felt full. You walk through your days with this quiet ache inside your chest, pretending everything's fine while a part of you silently wonders if you're being punished. That's the lie no one talks about, that maybe you're alone because you failed, because you're not enough, because you broke something. But what if I told you you're not alone because you failed? You're alone because something sacred is being built inside of you, something too holy to be exposed to noise. You see, there are seasons in your life when God doesn't allow you to be surrounded, not because He's angry with, but because He's shielding you. When a surgeon prepares for a delicate operation, he clears the room. Only what is necessary remains. Every distraction is removed. Every element of risk is blocked. Not because the patient is weak, but because the work is critical. And that's exactly what's happening in your soul right now. You're not being left behind. You're being set apart. There's something God is doing in you that requires isolation. Not the kind that wounds, but the kind that rewires. Not exile, but incubation. Look back for a moment. Can you remember the last time you felt truly seen? Not by people, but by something greater? Maybe it was in a moment of stillness, or a random night when you couldn't sleep, and the silence pressed in like a weight. Maybe it was during a walk, or a prayer whispered half in doubt, half in desperation. Those were not random moments. They were invitations to go deeper, to go inward, to go away. Because not everyone can come with you to the place you're headed. And that realization is brutal, but it's also sacred. There are truths that only grow in silence. There are revelations that only come when no one else is watching. There is a version of you that only emerges when you are no longer trying to be who everyone else expects. The loneliness you're feeling, it's not a punishment, it's a signal. A divine signal that you've stepped into a sacred space where the old connections can't survive. Not because they were evil, but because they were tied to a version of you that no longer exists. Think about how a caterpillar becomes a butterfly. It doesn't transform in front of the world. It enters darkness, total darkness, a space that looks like death, that feels like burial. But what's happening inside the cocoon is not death. It's restructuring, cells breaking, bones forming, wings preparing to stretch, and no one sees it, no one claps, no one posts about it, because the cocoon is sacred, and your isolation is your cocoon. You're being stripped of distractions, of noise, of comfort, because something glorious is forming beneath your skin, something that can't be rushed, something that will not be explained, only revealed. And right now, everything in you may be screaming for relief, for connection, for someone to just see the struggle. But this is the kind of transformation that happens in secret. You don't need to explain your absence. You don't need to apologize for your silence. You don't need to keep pretending you're okay. What you need is to understand that you're in a process far bigger than your understanding. There's a reason your prayers feel different lately. There's a reason the people you used to rely on don't feel safe anymore. There's a reason your soul feels like it's shedding something invisible. Because you are not who you used to be, and you're not yet who you will become. You're in between, and the in-between is where God does His most intimate work. Let this sink in. God hides what He valued. The world parades its treasures, but heaven conceals them. Diamonds are formed underground. Gold is buried in rock. Babies are knit together in the womb, and destinies are shaped in secret seasons. So what you're feeling right now, the ache, the isolation, the waiting, it's not abandonment, it's consecration. You've been chosen for a depth of transformation that few will understand. And while the world celebrates loud voices and visible platforms, heaven is training hidden hearts. Hearts like yours. This isn't the end of your connection to others. It's the redefinition of who you're meant to walk with. The old circle can't hold the weight of the new calling. The old rhythms can't carry the new frequency. That's why God is letting the ground shift beneath your feet. Not to destroy you, but to replant you. Because roots don't grow in sunlight. They grow in the dark. And right now, your roots are going deeper than ever before. Not everyone will understand this process. You might look foolish. You might feel forgotten. But what's being formed in you is not for the now. It's for what's coming. And when it comes, it will not be quiet. Sometimes, God doesn't silence the storm. He silences you first. You've been asking why no doors are opening, why the connections feel dry, why the people you trusted the most seem to be out of reach. But maybe the question isn't why it's happening. Maybe the question is, what is being protected inside you that no one else is allowed to touch right now? There's a part of your soul that's being shielded, because what's forming is still fragile. Not weak, fragile. And there's a difference. Weak things collapse under pressure. Fragile things are in formation. They are delicate, sacred, and temporarily hidden, not because they're broken, but because they are becoming something too valuable to be exposed prematurely. And maybe you didn't know this, but God hides things until they're ready to carry weight, until they can stand, until they're no longer at risk of being stolen, twisted, or poisoned by the hands of others. That's why He pulled you away, not to punish, but to preserve you. Think about David, anointed to be king, yet sent right back to the fields with the sheep. No throne, no palace, no applause, just wilderness, solitude, and a sling. It was in the hiding that David learned how to hear God's whisper above the noise of men. It was in the hiding that he faced lions and bears, so that one day he could face giants. You don't get crowned until you're first covered, and the covering doesn't feel glorious. It feels lonely, silent, sometimes suffocating. But every single person who carried something divine went through it. Moses had his desert, Elijah had his cave, Joseph had his prison, even Jesus had his garden of agony, alone, weeping blood, while the people closest to him were asleep. So why do we think we'll carry something holy without walking through something hidden? You see, the world celebrates exposure. It praises visibility. It chases the spotlight. But heaven works differently. Heaven forms kings in caves. Heaven builds prophets in obscurity. Heaven cultivates strength in silence. And that's where you are. You're not missing out. You're being redefined. The version of you that used to thrive in crowds is being dismantled. The part of you that needed validation is being undone. Because the next version of you will walk into rooms and carry presence, not insecurity. But here's the hard truth. You don't get to skip the breaking. You don't get to hold glory without first letting go of the image. And maybe that's why the isolation feels so violent, because something in you is still clinging to who you were before the hiding started. The people who used to be there, the attention you used to receive, the routine that once gave you, but now it's all gone quiet. And the silence is pressing in like a wall. But what if this silence isn't a wall? What if it's a womb? Because that's what sacred spaces feel like. Enclosed, dark, confusing, but full of movement you can't yet see. Wombs aren't comfortable, but they are full of promise. And when the time comes, birth is painful. The pushing, the tearing, the release. But after the pain, something holy is revealed. And maybe that's why you've been feeling contractions in your spirit lately. Something is trying to come through. A calling, a clarity, a voice, a vision. But it can't come through cluttered hands. It can't be birthed in a room full of noise. It can't grow under constant distraction. So God, in His mercy, has been removing what was never going to last. Stripping, separating, not to hurt you, but to make room for what's coming. And He's not slow. He's strategic. He's not ignoring you. He's investing in you because what's inside of you is too important to share with the wrong people too soon. That's why your phone is quiet. That's why the doors stayed shut. That's why the support dried up. Because if they cheered now, they'd take credit for the outcome. And God's not going to let anyone steal what He's been building in secret. There's a phrase in Scripture that says, "He prepares a table before me in the presence of my enemies." But did you ever notice? Preparation comes before the reveal. You're in the kitchen, the behind the scene. The ingredients are still raw. The recipe isn't complete. But when it's ready, it will be undeniable. And when it comes, they'll know. They'll see what the silence produced. They'll taste what was cultivated in hiding. And they'll understand why God had to pull you away for a while. So don't despise the covering. Don't curse the quiet. Because even in the loneliness, something eternal is being placed inside of you. And when God brings you out, you won't just emerge healed. You'll emerge anointed, and nothing will be the same. You don't need everyone to understand your silence for it to be sacred. You just need to stop apologizing for it. That inner pull you've been feeling, the urge to retreat, to disconnect, to be still even when the world screams for movement, isn't a flaw. It's a signal, a divine signal that your soul is undergoing a renovation so intimate, it can't be done with the doors open. And maybe that's what no one told you. Not all isolation is abandonment. Some of it is alignment. See, in the old version of your life, you were taught to equate love with proximity. That if someone wasn't there, it meant they didn't care. That if God was silent, it meant he was distant. But what if, just what if, the greatest acts of divine love are the ones that happen when no one sees? Think of the tree, not the part that flourishes above the soil, but the part we ignore, the roots. When a tree is growing, the roots don't get applause. They don't get posted on social media. No one walks by and says, "Wow, look at that root system." But that's where the real strength is being forged. And during droughts, storms, and changing seasons, the only reason that tree survives is because of what happened below the surface. Hidden, silent, and unseen. That's your life right now. It's not that nothing's happening. It's that everything important is happening where no one else can see. You're being fortified underground, and the deeper the root, the higher the rise. But this process, it's messy. It doesn't look inspirational. It looks like waking up at 2 a.m. with tears in your eyes and no words to pray. It looks like feeling disconnected from everyone, even God. It looks like reading verses that used to ignite your spirit and now feel like paper. It looks like silence that lingers just long enough to make you question if you're being forgotten. But you're not forgotten. You're being remembered in a different way. Because God is not building your life to impress people. He's building it to withstand pressure. And pressure doesn't require noise. It requires depth. There's a reason you're being stripped. There's a reason the surface-level conversations no longer fulfill you. There's a reason shallow spaces now exhaust you. You're not becoming bitter. You're becoming precise. What used to feed you now starves you. What used to excite you now drains you. What used to feel safe now feels suffocating. Why? Because your soul is shifting frequencies. You're tuning out the static of a world obsessed with validation and tuning in to something eternal, something real, something sacred. And the people around you might not get it. They might call you distant, cold, detached, but they don't realize they're speaking to a version of you that's being dismantled. That self no longer fits the shape of your soul. And this isn't about rebellion. It's about remembrance. You're not running away from people. You're running back to yourself. Because somewhere along the way, you gave too much of yourself to survive. You wore masks to be accepted. You diluted your truth to avoid conflict. You smiled through pain just to keep. And God, in His mercy, said, "Enough. Enough pretending. Enough performing. Enough pouring out when no one pours back in." So He pulled you back, not to punish your heart, but to teach it how to beat again, on its own, in rhythm with something holy, something eternal. Because before you can be sent into your assignment, you must be rebuilt. And maybe you've been asking, when will this end? But perhaps the better question is, what in me still refuses to surrender? Because this isn't just about time. It's about trust. Can you trust that this hidden season is working for you, even when it feels like it's working against you? Can you trust that the silence has a language of its own? Can you trust that every tear you've cried alone was seen, not by men, but by the one who measures your soul in eternity? Not applause? If your life has felt empty lately, maybe it's because the old containers are being broken. The jars that used to hold your identity, your relationships, your comfort, are cracking. Not because you're broken, but because you're being prepared to hold something far more powerful. And new wine needs new wineskin. You can't pour divine purpose into a vessel that's still shaped by people-pleasing. You can't carry prophetic fire in hands, still trembling with insecurity. You can't stand in sacred authority if you're still waiting for permission from the crowd. So God, in His grace, is reshaping you in the hidden place. And that hurts. It burns. It strips away everything that made you feel safe in the old world. But once it's done, you won't be dependent anymore. You'll walk into rooms and not wonder who approved. You'll speak with clarity, not for attention, but from truth. You'll rest, not because the world is quiet, but because your spirit is. That's the promise of the hidden season. Not comfort, but clarity. Not validation, but vision. Not applause, but authority. And once you've tasted that, you'll never go back to who you were before. You were never meant to be consumed by the noise. That's why silence has been chasing you. But most people fear the silence, not because it's empty, but because it's honest. Because when the noise dies down, the masks fall too, and all that remains is the sound of your own soul, beating, whispering, remembering. That's the part that terrifies many. We've spent years building identities out of echoes, repeating what others expected, mimicking what others admired, aligning our value with how much we could offer, produce, entertain, or fix. And when we're finally pulled into isolation, it's like the mirror starts showing a reflection we don't recognize. But that reflection is not a stranger. It's the version of you that has been quietly waiting underneath all the performances. The raw, unclothed soul that has nothing left to prove. And that's where the real confrontation begins. Because it's one thing to feel lonely. It's another to realize that the person you were trying to be isn't the one you were created to become. And now, in this wilderness, you're face to face with the truth. You've outgrown your old role, the caregiver who never received care, the strong one who was never allowed to fall apart, the encourager who couldn't say, "I'm breaking," without being told to stay positive. But now, no one's watching, no one's cheering. No one's needing you to be anything other than present. And for the first time, you have a chance to breathe in your own oxygen before handing it out to everyone else. This is what divine hiding really is. Not punishment, not exile, but recalibration. It's where God rewrites the rhythm of your life from one of external demand to internal alignment, where value stops being a performance and becomes a present. And here's what no one talks about. This hidden place will make you grieve, not because you've lost something, but because you're finally aware of what you've been carrying all these years. The weight of roles, responsibilities, expectations, the exhaustion of always being on, the pain of never really being seen for who you are beneath the label. That grief is holy. Don't rush it. It's the mourning of a life lived out of survival instead of connection. And while the world would tell you to move on, or stay strong, heaven whispers, be still. Let the tears speak. Let the silence echo. Let the old shell crack wide open. Because what happens next requires your full presence. You're not just recovering, you're rebuilding, brick by brick, from the inside out. And the foundation being laid now is one that can't be shaken by applause or rejection. Because it's no longer based on what you do. It's grounded in who you are when no one is looking. This is where your real strength is born, not in the crowd, but in the cave. Not when you're praised, but when you're processed. Not when you're surrounded, but when you're still. You start to realize that your worth is not connected to how needed you are, but how nurtured you are by God's presence in the quiet. And then something beautiful starts to shift. You stop craving constant conversation and start craving communion. You stop chasing clarity from others and start receiving conviction from within. You stop asking, "Why aren't they here?" and start seeing who God never meant to stay. And this clarity, it doesn't make you bitter. It makes you clean. Clean of resentment, clean of performative love, clean of emotional debts you never should have carried. You become free. Not because everything is perfect, but because your soul is finally resting in the arms of something unshakable. And when you look around, you realize What used to scare you, being unseen, being forgotten, being misunderstood, is now the very space where you're being restored. Because in the hiding, you're being shown what was never love in the first place. The conditions, the transactions, the manipulations disguised as care. And one by one, they fall away. Because love that doesn't honor your becoming isn't love, it's control. And heaven refuses to let control shape your destiny. So what happens now? Now, you begin to live without performing. You wake up and no longer feel the need to earn rest. You speak without shrinking. You stay soft without being shattered. You walk into silence not with fear, but with familiarity. Because you've met yourself there. You've met God there. And what was once a prison of loneliness becomes a sanctuary of light. And this is the turning point. This is where you realize you were never truly alone. You were never abandoned. You were being separated for something sacred, hidden, not forgotten, set apart, not discarded, held back, because you were being healed. And now, something in you has changed. You no longer want what drains you. You no longer chase what confuses you. You no longer tolerate what silences your spirit. Because in the silence, you remembered. You were never created to belong to noise. You were created to carry presence. And that presence is what the world needs now, more than ever. But it can't be manufactured. It can only be born in the stillness. Some of the most powerful launches in the universe begin with a long, intentional delay. Rockets don't just lift off. They go through countdowns, pressure checks, calibrations, hours of silence for just a few seconds of ignition. And yet, when they finally rise, they don't come back the same. That's what this hidden season has been for you. The world might have called it a breakdown. Heaven calls it a preparation sequence. And the question that haunts most people in isolation isn't, when will I be seen again? It's, will I even recognize who I've become when I finally re-emerge? Because something happens when you spend enough time alone with the truth. You stop seeing the world through the lens of urgency. You stop feeling the need to run ahead. You stop needing to be needed. And in that space, the ground beneath your soul shifts. You don't return as who you were. You return as someone who knows that your peace is non-negotiable, knows that your time is sacred, knows that your voice has weight, even when it's whispering. And that kind of knowing cannot be taken. That's why God hides people. Because when you are constantly exposed, you are constantly shaped by the reactions of others. You become reactive, dependent, desperate for validation. But in the hiding, all the mirrors are stripped away, and the only reflection left is God's voice bouncing off the walls of your own spirit. It's there that identity is reforged, not in applause, but in silence, not in titles, but in truth, not in the spotlight, but in the shadow. That's why caterpillars disappear before they become butterflies, not because they're weak, but because transformation requires sacred privacy. If someone were to rip open the cocoon too soon, they wouldn't find beauty, they'd find confusion, a mess, incomplete structures, wings too soft to fly. And yet, how many people try to burst out of their hidden seasons before they're ready? They panic at the stillness, they crave the noise, they confuse divine timing with delay, and they forfeit power in exchange for premature exposure. But you stayed. You let it undo you. You let it crush what needed to be crushed. You let it strip what no longer served. You let it pull you back, even when everything in you screamed to be seen. And now, whether you realize it or not, something in you is unrecognizable, not to the world, but to the version of you that had to die to get here. The overgiver? Gone. The performer? Gone. The apologizer? Gone. The one who begged for crumbs and called it love? Gone. What remains is something unshakable, quiet, certain, not loud, but present, not flashy, but anchored. And as strange as it sounds, this is why God didn't let people see you yet. Because what He's doing in you isn't for entertainment. It's not for likes or reels or followers. It's not for quick quotes or surface-level nods. It's for impact, and impact requires depth. You don't just emerge, you arrive. And when you do, The people who used to overlook you won't even recognize you, not because you've changed so much physically, but because your energy now speaks louder than your word, because your presence says what your mouth used to beg for, because your silence now carries more authority than your loudest declarations ever did. This isn't about revenge, it's about resonance. You're not coming back to prove anything. You're coming back to embody everything, not to be praised, but to be positioned. Because now, your feet know the difference between a stage and a sanctuary. Now, your heart knows the difference between attention and alignment. Now, your soul knows the difference between being chosen by men and being called by God. And you'll feel it. That moment when you step into a room and you no longer shrink. When you speak and your voice doesn't tremble. When you give, not from lack, but from overflow. It will feel familiar, not because you've been here before, but because deep down, you always knew this version of you existed. The version that wasn't afraid to take up space. The version that didn't second-guess every intuition. The version that stopped running toward noise and started listening to divine whispers. Because the truth is, you weren't being punished in the hidden place. You were being protected. There were rooms you thought you wanted to be in, but they couldn't hold your future. There were people you tried to hold on to, but they would have dropped the weight of your calling. There were opportunities that looked like elevation, but would have destroyed your foundation. And heaven said no, not because you weren't ready, but because they weren't. Because who you are becoming is not just for the next season, it's for the rest of your life. So now, the only question that remains isn't, when will I rise? It's, can I rise with reverence? Can you honor what the darkness taught you? Can you walk slowly, even when you're being pulled into momentum? Can you carry your silence into your spotlight without letting the spotlight steal your silence? Because the world doesn't need more noise. It needs people who've been through sacred silence and didn't come out empty, but full. And that's you now. You don't need to chase a platform. You don't need to beg for belonging. You don't need to force yourself into any space you've outgrown. Because who God hides, He reveals with power. And this time, when you're seen, it won't be because you pushed. It will be because you were placed.